Up next, let's talk about the Performance Analyzer, which is another tool that's native to Power BI. And the Performance Analyzer is a tool that records all of the behind the scenes actions that are happening within your report when filters are changed, a visual is updated, cross filtering occurs, DAX measures are calculated, etc. Basically, anytime something is updated within the report, the Performance Analyzer records it and will then display it for you. So you can almost think of this like Excel's macro recorder. The Performance Analyzer tracks the time in milliseconds for each action and then groups those actions into distinct buckets: the query load time, the visual load time, other tasks, and then you'll have a specific line item for direct query visuals if a direct query connection is present. So looking at this Performance Analyzer image on screen, we can see here the output of each of these steps. After the Performance Analyzer is finished recording, all of those recorded steps will show up with an associated time, they'll be named, and they'll be in this pane here. And by expanding an individual query, like our card query that we have highlighted, you'll be able to see all of these different buckets. So let's talk about each of these categories. First, we've got the DAX query, and this shows the amount of time that it takes for the visual to send the query to the internal engine, for the engine to process and run it, and then to return the result. So basically, this is how long it takes the DAX engines to process your code. And for the DAX query specifically, this is where some external tools like DAX Studio are really useful for optimizations. Next up, we have the visual display bucket, and this bucket shows the amount of time it takes for the visual you've selected to render. In basic terms, it's simply just the time it takes for that visual to kind of draw itself on screen. Now, keep in mind that if the visual contains web-based or geocoded images, those will also be included in this duration as well. And then last, we've got our other bucket. In the other bucket, it's really just all of the other tasks that the engine is performing that aren't related to either creating the visual or returning the results of the specific DAX query. So the other bucket includes activities like preparing the query, waiting for other visuals on the page to complete their queries, plus other background tasks that the engines are performing. All right, so let's head over to Power BI and we're going to explore the Performance Analyzer for ourselves. All right, so back in our AdventureWorks report here, and first things first, I'm going to collapse these panes. I'm going to remove formatting. We'll clean this up a little bit, and then I'm going to select the white space here just so we don't have a specific visual selected. So if we come up to the Optimize pane, we're going to click on Performance Analyzer, and this launches a brand new Performance Analyzer pane, and we'll change the size of this a little bit. You can see that we have one option here right now, is Start Recording. So if we click Start Recording, nothing's happened yet. So there's two ways to start generating this list of items. We can either click this Refresh Visuals button, and this is going to refresh all of the visuals on the page, or you could start interacting with the report, and that will also trigger this Performance Analyzer list to populate. So let's start off here, and we're going to click Refresh Visuals. So what this does is Power BI goes through, and it's going to refresh all of the different visuals within the page, and it's going to return the results in milliseconds, right? And you can see we've got a bunch of different values here. And if we expand one of these, we can start at the top of the list here, like with our left nav background. You can see that the visual display took 604 milliseconds, and then our other bucket took 453 milliseconds. Because this is more or less an image, there's no DAX associated with this, right? So it makes sense that we're not seeing that DAX bucket. Same thing with our next shape here. We've got this shape that's highlighted for this first kind of KPI card. And you can see again, in total, it took 1,049 milliseconds for this to initially load. The visual display was 604, and then the other bucket was 444. So pretty straightforward there. Let's collapse these, and let's head down to our first card. So now, because this card actually contains a DAX query, we now have that detail. So again, this is a long time, right, to wait for this to load, 5,966 milliseconds. But what's interesting here is the DAX query was 408. the visual display was 23, and the other component, right, that time that we spent waiting for everything else to kind of load or render ahead of this took 5,535 milliseconds. So again, you get some really interesting insights here as you start poking around at how long load times take. All right, so at any point here, say you're happy with the results here, you kind of understand how things are working, click stop. We can close out of the performance analyzer pane. And then again, it's as simple as turning it back on again, start recording, and then we can refresh all of the visuals to get those durations in milliseconds again. One other interesting thing to call out here is that you can actually export the entire list here as a JSON file, right? So if you click export, it's basically going to give you this entire output in JSON format. Pretty cool stuff here. And at this point, you may be thinking, all right, this is great. Like, I can see what's happening and I can export this as a JSON file, but what does that mean? Like, what do I do with this? And there are some great performance optimization tips on learn.microsoft.com. So things like making sure that your data model is really well built, right? A lot of those best practices that we covered in the modeling section, limiting the number of visuals on the page to only what's necessary, right? That's going to help decrease those other wait times, making sure that you're applying restrictive filters so that only the data that needs to be loaded is actually loaded. If you're using custom visuals, check on their performance, right? Is a custom visual loading really slowly and dragging down the overall performance of your report? And you can also start digging into your DAX right within the Power BI report as well. So let's say that you notice one of your DAX calculations is running really, really slow. Let's jump down to, this revenue trending chart here, right? But let's say your DAX query here is running very, very slow. You could dig into that measure and try and determine what types of DAX optimizations could be made. Maybe you're using iterator functions that end up being slower than you anticipated. Or maybe you're using a bunch of different logical functions that are slowing things down. So there's some instances like that where you could kind of discern or understand, like, hey, if I update these functions that I'm using within a measure, that may impact the optimization. But if you're really looking for some deeper optimizations and understanding into exactly what's happening, there are some great third-party tools like DAX Studio, and we're going to talk about some of those quickly next.